All right, thanks for joining today. This is a webinar covering Proplanner's Pivot Grid export capability. That's a module that has been developed over the past year within Proplanner's Assembly Planner tool for really allowing Proplanner users to get access to this broad set of process data that they're building out within the tool, and then generate customized reports on the fly, save those reports, and also export the data sets to tools like Microsoft Excel so they can do additional work that they may need to do or pull it into other systems. Okay, so the Pivot Grid export module is actually located inside of the data management section of the application. Within here, the way the screen is structured, at the top you have some information about the actual export that is being created. And what you're able to do here is you're actually able to create reusable sets of exports. This is very similar to the advanced search capability where you can save search templates. Here you can do the same thing. You actually can create saved searches that are for you, private searches, as well as you can create public searches so that your colleagues can reuse that Pivot Grid export. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and build one from scratch. I'll walk you through the steps, and then we'll go through the process of reusing other exports. Okay, so to create a new export, what I'm going to do is I first need to think about what's the data that I'm trying to get at. Because recall, what I'm doing is I'm going to have this process database, really everything that exists within the library section here, within your process routings. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to target certain entities within that list where I can get at operations, routings, activities, and items. And then what I will do is I will say, okay, for example, show me all of the activities or all of the stations where a certain part number is used, or show me all of the data underneath a certain routing, or in some cases that we're seeing, show me all of the data across the entire database, all routings, all activities, all stations. Bring in all the fields you want and then pivot against them. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more simple today. We're not going to go after everything. But what I can do is I can say, well, I'm going to go ahead and find all of the activities which have a certain model mapped to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new export called find a certain model. I'm going to search against activities. I'm going to leave this as a private one. This is only going to be accessible to me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow a couple-step process, and you can really utilize these 3 different buttons here, as well as the tabs down below to get at the data. Now, this screen that we're looking at allows us to configure the views the way we would like. I'm going to go ahead and restore the default layout, and then we'll go back to my more customized or preferred view, which is then also saved for you. The way we're going to flow through this control is we're first going to determine against which process data do we want to search and what are our search criteria. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and say customize my search criteria. And this is our standard advanced search framework where I have access to most of the different entities and objects against those entities, or attributes, I should say. So here I'm going to go ahead and say, well, show me all the data associated with the routing that has this particular ID. And I could say, well, I'm going to go ahead and say where the ID contains, and I'm going to go ahead and use the word line, because I know from my routing list that I have a routing representing line 1 for my model year 2019. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back over here where I was. So I have my search criteria defined. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select customize my pivot fields. This is just as important as picking which data I want included in the overall data set, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say out of that data set that made it into this export, go ahead and use these particular fields to pivot against. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and pick and choose a couple. I'm going to go ahead and first grab my ID field, and then I'm going to grab the we're going to go ahead and then grab the operation sequence number. I'm going to go ahead and grab my station ID, and I'm going to then grab a couple of other things. We're going to go ahead and look for the model ID against the activities, and then we'll grab the activity information, including the ID, description, and then why don't we grab the sequence number also? That'll be activity sequence number. So over here in my selected fields control, we're going to go ahead and press the Get Data button, and then you're going to notice that it then populates down in the Export Data tab all the fields that I have listed here using this alias name. And I can customize these as long as they're unique. So I can just go ahead and say routing, and I might trim this down to just say op sequence number, station, say activity ID, excuse me, let's say model. How about this one for activity ID, activity description, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab my activity sequence number. And you'll notice after I press Get Data again, it's going to update all of those. So I can really make these display however I would like. So to use this control, what we do is we go ahead and we drag and drop like this. So when I went and grabbed the routing data and I put it into the row list, it dropped all of the routing IDs that it found within the search criteria, only one in this case. It will go ahead and drop that in as a row here. Now, this is just a pivot table. So I could drag it over here. It'll do the same thing. I could drag it here, and I could actually make it, for some reason, I could make it a sum of the routing IDs. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I could if I wanted to. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put it back as a row. I think that makes the most sense. Next thing I will do is I'm going to go ahead and just drag in my station IDs. I'm going to grab my operation sequence number, my activity IDs, and now you're starting to see things really start to break out. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab just my model ID. Okay. I want to give myself a little bit more screen real estate because I can see that things are becoming a little bit squished here. I'm going to go ahead and press the push pin on each of these controls. You'll notice it's going to put them into a tabbed form. And now I've got a little bit more of the screen to see my data. So you can see here what it's showing me is that on my routing line 1 model year 2019, at station L1A, which is op sequence number 1, these activities have these models mapped. Okay. Now, right now, I have everything as a distinct row. I could make them a column like this. Go like this. This doesn't really make sense. The model IDs are not really something we would sum against, but again, it's just a pivot table. So I can pivot against that how I would like. Let's go ahead and grab the models, bring it over here. And then we're going to go and take a look at our process data. So I'd like to connect some dots for everyone. So again, what this is showing me is that for the line 1 model year 2019, line 1A, op sequence 1, activity ID 10, I have only my model year 2019 mapped, but activity 11, I have both. Let's go look at the actual source data. It's going to flag me. Do I want to make changes? Yes, I do. And then it confirms that it's successfully saved. I'm going to go ahead now and view my model option data. And then we will look at activity ID 10. And we can see that within that activity ID, we have model year, activity ID 10. How about this? I was looking at row 10. We have model year 2019. Activity 11, we have both. Okay. That explains how we have that data broken down there. you'll notice we have additional model mappings at other activities that you would have seen looking at that view of the routing level model option data that I just had pulled up. But this is really just getting at that same data that we happen to have, kind of a silly example here in that routing view model option data screen. What else could I do with this? Well, say I want to make this something that's a little flattened out. I can see it record by record. What I just did was I grabbed the row number attribute, which is representing each individual row of data that we have. So what this is showing me is across the routing, I now can kind of break it down. I don't have all these merged cells that I need to deal with. So I'm kind of out of the pivot mode, right? You can see I'm not even using the summation capabilities yet. We'll get there in a minute. This is showing me that same data set that we were just looking at a minute ago, but now I can see it broke out in this form. But what if I wanted to say, show me only those activities in routings and stations where I have this model year 2019 being mapped? Similarly, I could say only model year 2020. Okay. How else can we do this? Let's go ahead and make a slight modification. I could say I want to customize the search criteria. And now what I want to do, I want to say, give me all of the activities where not only are they mapped to the routing, they're mapped to that particular model ID. I'm going to go ahead and say contains 2019. I'm going to press my get data button. And at that point, it's going to refresh the data based on the latest within the process library. Then I can see that now it actually does not have that model year 2020 inside of it because I used my search criteria to filter that data set out. I can keep doing that with my saved searches. I have the ability to also perform a save as. So it might be that I want to go ahead and have my 2019 search, and then I can do a save as and have a 2020 based search. So I don't need to go back to this search criteria over and over again. It will save that for me. Okay. Let's go ahead and do a little different example now. This time what we're going to do is we're going to look at station time data. There we go. So in this one, I have a search where I'm also looking against routings. And this time I'm saying, show me all the routings where the ID does not equal the value of 1. This is kind of a backhanded way of saying, give me everything within the database. Then within my field list, what I'm looking for are the routings, stations, time data, both estimated as well as calculated times, or my predetermined, as well as my activity IDs. As we did before, I can clean up the names, make it a little bit easier to read, like that. And go ahead now and press get data. So what I can do here is I can say, all right, go ahead for this routing, give me all the stations, and now summarize for me the amount of work based upon the estimated times within that routing. Similarly, I can do a side-by-side comparison by dragging my calculated time data in. This allows me to directly compare estimated versus calculated time. I can see by looking at this, I obviously have some holes in my data. My engineering team is behind. We have not completed enough of our calculated time studies. I can see at least at station 1, I have something very odd going on. So I have 25,000 seconds versus 22 seconds over here. That's a problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and extend one of the searches that we did earlier, where we had the model ID being incorporated. So right now I have all of the work within a routing coming in. Now what I want to do is I want to say, go ahead and show me the activities that have that model year 2019 being mapped. So I'm going to do a contain style search, plug this in, get my data again. And now I can see that my numbers are very different. And in fact, now it is only showing me the activities that have that model mapped to them, and it's purging out the nones. So it's not including anything that is generic, and it's not including things which do not have the model year 2019 model being mapped. So now I can see my model specific time data. Okay. And we're going to take this another step further, and we're going to look at the most advanced of the exports that we've done so far. What I'm doing again is I'm saying, show me everything. But this time what I'm going to do is I will utilize structured process data that it takes to actually import process data back into Proplanner, specifying the routings, op sequence number, operation effectivity information, and then the activity identifying information with the IDs, sequence numbers, and effectivity dates. And what this particular export is doing is it's showing me the ID of the tools as they're being used. I need to drop some additional fields in here. It's all going to start to come together really quick once I press the export button. Excuse me. Well, how about we press the get data button? So here we can see we have what hopefully is a very familiar data structure. Their IDs, sequence numbers, and effectivity information. And finally, we have my resource IDs. We could say, well, this resource ID, while Proplanner knows what that means, is a little bit difficult for a human to understand. Let's go ahead and actually grab the resource description. Grab that. Go ahead and press get data again. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my resource description. And there we go. So this is showing me every activity station mapping of the different tools within the system. If I want, I can actually copy and paste this data out to Excel. I can also utilize an export to Excel tool. Where I like this, what you see is what you get export. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. Then we'll go ahead and open that file. Now we can see from this, it's really exactly what we were looking at within Assembly Planner. But this data set can be created so you can then pull the data back into Proplanner after you've manipulated it inside of Excel or imported it into some other third-party tool. If you're interested in the details of how all of that works, I actually wrote a blog post a couple weeks ago now on exactly how you would do that. I would encourage you to check that out if that is something that you are interested in. It is the pivot grid export structured data example. It will actually walk you through step by step of how to do what I just performed within the application. Okay, so to wrap up, I want to go through one last thing, just a variant on this that directly addresses one of the questions that I've received really multiple times. So let's do a quick compare and contrast. So I'm back on my routing. I'm going to go ahead and run one of our standard reports. We'll run the station tools report. This has predefined filtering criteria that can be used. Very powerful filtering criteria that also allows you to select which particular stations you'd like included. You can evaluate model mapping, many of the same things that we're actually doing inside of the pivot grid export. The point being, this is a canned report that has a fixed structure in terms of the columns that will be displayed. One of the things that we've been seeing has been quite successful with this pivot grid export module is that I can take something like this, and what I can do is I can, on the fly, modify it as I would like. Here I've added my station ID. I'm going to go ahead and press Get Data. I'm going to remove a number of fields that might not be of any interest at all. Well, what I can do is I can create something like this, really a customized report where you didn't have to come talk to Proplanner about configuring the report template. I can come in here and I can immediately create a report. I can export this to Excel, as we just did. I can adjust the fields. Let's say there is another process field that I want to have included. I can do that. Let's say there is another resource field that I want to get to. I can do that also. I can go grab all of these different resource attributes to drop them in to the evaluation. We can create that on the fly. I also have the ability, as we discussed earlier, where I can apply the filter conditions directly to this report. I can say, well, I only want to see the tools at line 1A. Here you go. So you can mimic many of the things that you can do in the canned reports, but this out of the box has the capability to allow you to customize the fields and easily move that data into Excel. Okay, so that concludes what I wanted to walk through during the review today. As always, if you have any questions, hit us up at support@proplanner.com. We're happy to walk you through how this pivot grid export module functions, and if you have any ideas for how we can make it better. Thank you.